In spring 2017, I was quite interested in this idea that everything is linked. So every person, every idea, every rock, every environment, every plant is linked together somehow, and we think of ourselves as distinct things, but in actual fact we're actually part of a bigger picture, and we're all linked together. So on the 14th of June, I decided that I would try and show this by crocheting the news. The 14th of June was a date that kind of goes down in history because it was a date of the Grenfell Tower disaster. So on the morning that I woke to start crocheting the news, there were pictures of this tower in its blue and white cladding, and the kind of scorched remains of the building, and the fires licking up the side of the building. So I started to crochet that piece. You can see that here it's represented by the blue and the white of the cladding, and then the kind of smouldered part in the middle. And then right in the middle of this particular work, it's burnt. So I actually set fire to the yarn to burn it. And then on the consecutive days came online this idea of the extra towers that would be affected. So at first there was 11, I think then there was 38, 42, and I think I stopped crocheting at about 90 towers. I wanted to look behind the news and to start to think about what are the structures and the things that we have in place that make these things more likely to happen, maybe make people's lives more difficult. Basically what it represents is the powers that be, the kind of the laws, money, all those things that kind of, big developers, big companies that lead to these decisions which directly affect sort of the average person's daily life. So we've got the green of the Parliament seats, but also it sort of represents the green of money as well, and wealth. Around sort of the middle of July, there was a piece of news about Mosul and ISIS being thrown out of Mosul. And for this, I kind of looked at the pictures of the area, and I was impressed by the look of kind of dust and this kind of sort of white derelict buildings with scorched pieces on, but also that people within that were kind of sheltering, and that sometimes they might be wearing quite bright clothes. So within that those kind of colours, you'd find someone sheltering. So within the work, you can see there's kind of little recesses that again have been kind of burned or kind of cut out. And inside those are these kind of little bubbles which sort of represent the people trying to shelter in this sort of derelict and sort of destitute community. For this piece, I was kind of interested in the images of refugees as they came across borders, the fact that they may come in, a colourful top and a pair of trousers that don't go with their top because they've basically just grabbed whatever they could, or they've had items of clothing donated along the way. So creates these kind of colourful streams of people whose lives are, far from colourful really, and far from sort of bright. So I kind of was interested. I wanted to depict this piece of news as a stream of people, but each of the circles I call a body, and by body it could be an individual person or it could be an organisation. So in this respect, each of these circles sort of represents a group of people sort of moving across the land. And the good thing about crochet is it doesn't have to stay flat. So if you crochet and don't increase your stitches, you'll start to create these pieces that come up into sort of vessels. So as I was creating these pieces, some of them created things that were reminiscent to me of boats and the boats that people were coming over in. And this piece is called Storm Season. So this piece is about Storm Maria, Irma and Harvey, which, the areas that they blew up in experience hurricanes quite a lot. They have a storm season each year, but I think this storm season was completely unprecedented in the ferocity of the storms and also the frequency. So people were just getting themselves back on their feet and another storm was hitting. So on this piece you see It's inspired by those diagrams that you get of storms and cyclones, which kind of go round in a spiral, but also by the images of it as it went across the Caribbean. In those places, the photos that I was seeing was the blue of the sea and also the blue of bits of plastic that maybe people had used for their roofs or to create structures for their homes with. But nothing else really, so just these bits of plastic floating around and the whole infrastructure destroyed really because people's streets and houses were so temporary and so flimsy that they just got kind of completely blown away. And then the storms kind of went in over America and the images changed a lot. So they changed from those kind of the blues and the plastics floating around to this kind of muddy floodwater, which sort of sat in between the grids that were created by the buildings. And the buildings, because they were more structurally sound, existed, carrying on existing, you know, in a destroyed and damaged way. But then I read a piece of news about the oil industry in America and how much of it was actually offline because of the storms. And that kind of brought it back to me that actually the oil produced in America and its lack of it will have a direct effect on every single person throughout the world. So it could be in increased oil prices. It could be in the way that their president reacts to different countries and a lack of resources. So it brought me back up again. So the black pieces within the work sort of represent that the oil really under the ground that kind of we've all become sort of addicted and reliant on really to some extent. And then at the same time, there was a piece of news about plastics and the Blue Planet programme was on the telly. And it really, it seemed to mean a lot to people. And it sort of, it was like a call to action with regards to how we use plastic and how much plastic is in our oceans and the effect that that's having. And the fact that that plastic will never go away because it's kind of it won't break down. It's a persuasive material that will always be there. So this piece is, I find it, to me, it's abhorrent in terms of its colour and it's not my taste at all. So I had to create something that I found quite ugly to represent that kind of quite ugly issue. And every piece of yarn that I've used is a sort of a nylon or a polyester or, you know, an unnatural mix. And I've actually got some clothes labels which I'm going to sew onto this. And I looked down at my clothing to see whether I could get some labels to put on the work, and every single piece of clothing I had on had a nylon or a polyester or a man-made material in it, so consequently had oil and plastic within it. And the little white and green bits sort of represent plastic bottles. And then the other thing that happened around the time of this, just after, was Donald Trump did one of his tweets, which of course he's becoming renowned for. And actually I think it was also in a meeting. He'd asked his colleagues why we have to accept people from, and I'm quoting here, and you know it was well distributed, so why we have to accept people from these shithole countries. And in actual fact, within that quote, they were talking about the kind of the storms and things, and he was talking about places like Puerto Rico potentially, as well as Africa and those places that he kind of clumped together as under this, you know, under this banner. Puerto Rico being an American dependent, so the people there being American citizens. So in answer to why they're coming, because they are Americans, in the same way as the people who might need help in the floods in Texas might need help. So might the people in these other islands. So this piece is made to look as kind of horrible and pooey as possible. I've been crocheting a lot of this out on the streets of Northwich. I set certain dates and I go out regardless of the weather. And I felt it's been interesting to see the effect of that on my own body in terms of, you know, getting flu and I'm feeling very, very cold, even though I'm not out for that long. So that kind of going out and about is a performative element of the work as well. And it seemed important that as the work was called Storm Season, I was out and about in the storms creating it. So part of this project was to work with different groups and individuals so that they could create their own circle or body, as I call them. So this piece is by a friend of mine who she works at a special needs school, and was looking after the kids one day and decided that it'd be a good idea to stand in the middle of the seesaw. And she fell off and she broke her leg. So she's been at home recovering for probably about 7 months. And so she wanted to create a piece of work that was about the boredom and monotony of being at home. And she used the red around the outside of the work to indicate that she was getting better and that soon she'd be able to go out and about and do all those things that she used to do before. And she also wanted to represent her indebtedness to the NHS, so she created the blue and the white pieces to kind of show how grateful she was to them as well. So as well as asking individuals to create work, I've been working with several groups. I've been working with 2 sets of students. So I've worked with students from Hope University and MMU, doing some lectures with them. That's been really good because it's sort of allowed me to interrogate the kind of work a little bit more and have to answer some of their kind of trickier questions. And I've also kind of been working with people in Northwich and Rudheath, and I'm working in Great Budworth with the church there as well. So each section, each time the work is exhibited, I work with different sets of people, and that allows us to make more work to contribute. And another piece I've been interested in is the idea of employing people who are already experts in crocheting. So most of the time I'm kind of doing an exchange where I will teach someone a skill, and in exchange they may create a piece of work that they can then exhibit as part of the work. But I was interested in the idea that some other social engaged artists have kind of worked on, of kind of employing people and creating a sort of economy of people who are making work towards a bigger piece. So I've asked people to make snowflakes, whatever size they want them to be, at £5 a snowflake, and at the moment I'm having those they're coming in via the post like a snowflake blizzard, really. And that's interesting because some people have decided to make them voluntarily, some people have decided that they need to be paid. So it'd be interesting to explore that part as well. Once you come out of your studio, you open yourself up to meeting all sorts of people. So as part of that, I went into sort of spaces like the museum and the library, and places where people might go to access different services, the shopping centre. And because you're kind of circulating in the street, and you're being seen quite a bit on the street doing your crochet, and I have a suitcase with a sign on it, so it indicates that I'm doing something a bit curious, a bit performative in a way. You encounter the same people. So during my time in Warrington, I've encountered the same chap who has kind of fallen on really hard times and finds himself homeless. And so he's told me sort of quite a bit about his story and his backstory, and it's sort of inspired thoughts about how we're looked after quite well when we're younger, but not so great when we become adults and we might find ourselves in times of need. And that also, there was a parallel in that there was a piece of news that was on Breakfast News about that very thing, a report that had come out that said we're looked after quite well. You know, when we find that we've got a baby who's born premature, they'll be very well looked after and cared for. Children are cared for, but then as we get older and maybe as we find ourselves, you know, much older and maybe suffering from dementia and those kind of things, we're looked after less and less. So the way I've indicated this within this work is by having through texture. So in the middle there's kind of quite a soft kind of fleshy colour, and it feels nice, pleasant, and then as we go out it becomes harsher. So at the outer thing there's quite a harsh string and wire. So the colour is not as important in this piece as it is in some of the other pieces, but it's about the way that the piece feels, which sort of emphasises that kind of rapport.